Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
We wanted to invite our mentors to our podcast today. And, when we talk about mentors, you think about, it means something different to everyone. To me, it's someone who is empowering, someone who's motivating. I know as a teacher, I had many mentors, and they all allowed us to think out of the box and really get you to be in that mindset of being a risk taker, because the best teachers are risk takers. And that's really, to me, what a mentor is. And I had many of them. Every principal I had when I was teaching was a fantastic mentor, and as well as district administrators too. And what I think they all had in common was that they always pushed the envelope for me. They always gave me these opportunities for growth and for learning. And a lot of times I go in my mailbox and they say, Jamie, this is really good for you. You should sign up for this. I have money set aside for you. Go ahead and do that. Or, just, hey, I saw this. I know someone else did this. This would be perfect for you. Or I think you should go and speak at this event. Just really pushing me. That's what they all had in common. And I invited Laura L. Scott here as my mentor for this podcast. Why? Well, number one, she was my mentor in two different situations, as a teacher, but then also as a technology coordinator. And I was only a technology coordinator because she pushed me outside of my comfort zone. And that's what Laura does best. What was always consistent with Laura is that she is beyond dynamic. And dynamic isn't really the word, because she's beyond that. She's so inspiring, just one of those pump you up type of people. And I'll let Laura tell us a little bit more about that. But the sought after consultant in the real estate world, but I think beyond that as well, who is a motivational speaker. And you know what? It is perfect for her. So we're going to talk a little bit about mentorship and what it means to Laura and why she's so good at it, and some tips as well in a little bit. But Jerri, what I want to know is what does mentorship mean to you, and what has it meant to your career?
Sure. So when I think about mentorship, I have to go back to high school, because that's where I met Dr. Dole 42 years ago. Dr. Dole. Making us sound old, aren't I? But so here's the deal. I was this kid in high school that really had low self-esteem, and I wasn't pushing myself. I kind of knew that I was going to college. That was always a given. So I was just cruising. And this new teacher came on the scene in this small town. And so, people talk really quickly. And he was so different than anything that we had ever had before. He really made us think. He allowed us to personalize what we were learning, so to speak, because he was our history and social studies teacher. So he'd let us pick out what interests us. And, I was not turning the tap for anyone. I was lazy. And
can't even imagine that, Jerri.
It's true. It is true. I got to Dr. Dole's class, and all of a sudden it just ignited this flame in me to want to learn, because he was so dynamic. And I think, number one, he cared about us. But I found a quote from Oprah that really says it all about Dr. Dole when I met him as a student, right? That a mentor is someone who allows you to see the hope within yourself. I don't know that I had a lot of hope when I met him. And he believed in me. That made a huge difference. Well, then move forward like 5 years. I went to college and I wanted to be Dr. Dole in the classroom. I wanted to be just like him, because I knew what he did for me personally. So I wanted to do that for other kids. So I came back and student taught, and he was the principal there.
Oh, wow.
And he was so supportive, and he was pushing me all the time. I appreciated that so much. And then we were both in the state of Kansas. So we saw each other, yearly at different events and things, but always stayed in touch. And then in 2013, I applied for a position in the district where he was the superintendent, and became the one of his 3 assistant superintendents. And I was so excited to be able to work with him because I know the impact that he has on people and how he pushes people forward. And it was a wonderful, I'm trying to remember if you were here 3 or 4 years, but I loved every minute of it. He would push us, but he does it in such a way you don't feel like you're being pushed.
Yep.
And he knows kind of maybe where to stop so you don't get burned. But he also knows that he can keep moving you forward. And I appreciated that. He also gave us he allowed us to fail if we would learn from our mistakes. And we had great discussions every week. He took time to talk to everyone and to move them forward. And so his mentorship has had a long span over my life, and I've always followed him and admired him. And so I'm so appreciative because I think he really turned my life around in high school. And I say he made a huge difference to where I was going. He really changed the trajectory of where I was headed. So thank you, Dr. Dole.
Wonderful.
My pleasure.
When I came to Lawerence, there were a lot of administrators here, and I would hear all of them talk about Dr. Dole and his commitment to them personally. And I think that's part of the mentorship.
Yes.
It was not just about how are you running your school or a gotcha. It was never a gotcha with him. And he would go out and visit with each principal separately and not only talk about what was happening in the school district, he was talking about what's happening within themselves. And I think I also heard a quote one time that a good leader can help people believe in them. A great leader helps you believe in yourself. And so he falls into that great category because he was pushing our people to believe in themselves. But not many superintendents have that passion to work with people personally. They're just in the weeds in the day-to-day issues.
Running a business, right?
Yeah. And so my first question to you, Dr. Dole, is why did you believe that was such an important part of your job as superintendent? To work with each person like that?
You know, Jerri, that's a really interesting question. And thank you, by the way. My ego has been uplifted and I appreciate that. You know, as a mentor, whether you know it or not, you don't know that you're having an impact on people's lives all the time. And so certainly Jerri and I have talked enough to know that some of our background is interesting. So first of all, thank you. You know, the difference between managing and leading is really, really important to me. And managing is very important, but that is sometimes the behind the scenes work that needs to be done. Leading is dealing with people. And it's just impossible for me to think about leading a school district without engaging people in that process. In Lawerence, we had 20 some schools. It was important enough to me that I evaluated all the building principals personally, which gave me an opportunity to really get to know them on a personal level, which was very important to me. There's an old adage in the business world, manage by walking around. Yes. I've changed that some to talk about leadership by being visible. Leading by walking around. It's amazing what people will tell you if you just get out in the schools and walk around and listen to people.
Yes. Well, how did you acquire those skills? How did you know to do that? Did you have a mentor or?
I did, but I think more of it just comes from how you are raised to some degree, and the importance that my parents, who certainly were my mentors, placed on those personal relationships. I think you intuitively figure it out as well. If you really want to move an organization, you're not going to move an organization with facts and figures. You're going to move an organization by inspiring them. And so if you can inspire people, I saw some pretty good results from a student achievement standpoint early in my career. Dating back to teaching, Jerri, you give me credit, but you brought so much potential to the classroom that I saw. And so as soon as you see that potential and you're able then to just talk to people, then that ends up being inspiration. But many times it's just taking the time to talk to people.
What advice would you give to someone out of the Rick Dole playbook of being a mentor? Because I think mentors are so important. Three women here that were all in technology, which is traditionally a male field. And it's so nice to have a mentor that can help you in that respect as well. So what plays would you give people to be good mentors?
It's interesting. Part of my job now at the university is that I run the statewide mentoring program for new leaders across the state. And so I've been able to really up my game from a theory standpoint. So I'm a very practical leader and I led school districts, but at university, you got to combine that with theory. And there's some wonderful resources out there, but a lot of it boils down to listening. And the second most important piece is that your job as a mentor is not to answer questions. Your job is to build the capacity of your mentee to answer their own questions. And once you get in a listening mindset and a building capacity mindset, then it all makes sense. Then you can ask good questions and guide them, but not direct them. I think is a really good difference. And then people think you're a great listener when really you just shut your mouth and let them talk and ask a few guiding questions. So building capacity of others, I think, is the key point.
Right. And that skill's kind of hard to build too, because we all want to solve problems for people. Right. It is hard to get out of that because you're not really doing them a favor when you're solving the problem for them.
I really hear a lot of what you're saying. I feel like is a secret sauce to mentorship because it's what I see in Laura as well. And I think it's also, Jerri, interesting because it's such a common theme throughout all of our podcasts. It's about building relationships. And I think that's the difference here because it's not always in your head and it's in your heart too. And I think that's what Rick was talking about, right? It's sort of, not everyone can be a mentor. Anyone can be a mentor. Not everyone can be a great mentor. And I think that's the difference. You really do need to, and I think too, what Rick was saying, providing that ownership. And that's what Laura did as well. So, and what I really appreciated about Laura was her authentic approach. You mentioned that gotcha that a lot of administrators do, Jerri. Oh no. Yes. When I was teaching in Colts Neck, where I was teaching, the principal, Joan Kilcommons, Laura, the assistant director of curriculum there, and then the superintendent, none of them would just come unannounced. They all asked you, when do you want your observations? Because they want it to be real. They don't want it to be a gotcha moment. And the idea was to get everyone involved. And again, about that ownership. So I loved that. And it was that empathy, right? That relationship building. So that also inspired people. It made you feel like, yes, you can take risks and we're all in it together. It's not us against them. We're doing this together here. And I think that's what really was so comforting and inspiring. But what do you think, Laura? What is the key to nurturing people and providing them that career trajectory that you think that they should belong on without overstepping and without making them feel overwhelmed? What is that key?
I think it's, for me, it's rather holistic, and I totally agree with Rick in terms, part of it is just in you. It's the way you're wired, and also the way you're raised. Although when you're younger, you think your parents are clueless, right? But when you start to get older, you look back and you say, boy, I really did learn a lot. And I can remember my mom, who was the first woman superintendent of one of the largest city school districts in the United States. said to me at one point, and it didn't mean anything then, but I said something, we were talking about her job, and she said, Laura, always remember, real leaders create other leaders. And so then when I got into education, I knew, because when I started teaching at Neptune with your dad, it was all about the kids. And it was building a community that wasn't focused around adults, not around the teachers, not around the parents, et cetera. Obviously, the parents voted for our budgets, et cetera. But how do you build a child-centered school district? And so that was my driving force. And as you know, when I was able to start doing the recruiting and bringing people into school districts, it was creating the district what is that vision? What is that utopia? What is that Camelot that you want? That'll be a perfect situation with the kids. Then you hire to that, right? Right. And what I've learned in the transition from education to business, number one, they're totally parallel. You're still teaching. It's all about building culture and living that culture. And so then when you live the culture, like, for example, when we hired you to come on and work with the kids in science, it's so easy when somebody's enthusiastic and loves their kids and really wants to deliver something. And then you just get like hooked. It's a juice. And you're like, oh man, yeah. So yeah, Jamie, here, go to this science thing, go to this, go to the IT thing, do, whatever. And then
it's funny because that's what Rick was talking about too, that reciprocal nature of inspiration. I think it kind of feeds.
And it's like you get your juice from being there for people and seeing the difference in the kids, right? And to your point about risk taking, if you think about our time in Colts Neck, we were really pushing the boundaries with a lot of the curriculum that we were introducing.
Big time.
And the parents trusted us, so they allowed us to do a lot of things. But again, we incorporated them as part of the culture too. Right. So, that risk-taking thing, I agree 100%, the empowerment. And, it's also that I think creating that culture of trust and safety.
Right,
right. Feel safe doing it.
Yes.
And the transition in the business has been exactly the same. When I started working running Douglas Elliman, it was almost like I was running a school district again and building to a culture that we wanted that was going to be client-centered.
Yeah. So you were teaching and you taught with my dad, as you mentioned. And it's funny that you mentioned that culture, because I think in another podcast, I said a quote, not a quote, but something my dad always said. People would ask him, what do you teach? And, he taught architectural drawing, he taught woodworking, he taught technology, technology education, and he was a video production teacher. But what he always answered was always, I teach kids. That's the idea. And I think that was that culture you're saying that was in there, in that district, in Neptune. But then you were, I think in between there, you went right there to be curriculum director, right?
And in Neptune, what they did, they made me a supervisor of special services. And then I left and went to become a supervisor of mathematics at Spotswood, and then went to then went to Colts Neck. And first I was the director of special services. And then I morphed into what I really wanted to be doing, was into the curriculum. But the special services was important because we were one of the first school districts. It was a total inclusion school district, right? And really focused a lot on that, and creating the ability to have heterogeneous classrooms and all kids succeed. And that really then created the whole environment of creativity. How do you create curriculum that addresses the needs of all kids in the classroom? And that, to me, that was exciting. I always say that my time in education, even my time now, but especially in education, working with you and Maureen and all the folks, it's extraordinary people working together to do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And you feed off of one another.
Yeah. It's true. Then after there, you were the assistant superintendent in Highland Park, which is when you said, hey, we need a technology coordinator. Are you interested? And I don't even know what that means. Like, I didn't know what to expect, but I was so interested, intrigued, and I'm so glad you pushed me to do that outside of my comfort zone. But then you left after that into this corporate this top real estate agency. And you're saying that there was a lot of parallel.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't by design. I didn't leave to go into business. It was friends of mine that were watching what I did in education. My one friend said, "Do you think you can do what you did in education and business?" And I said, "I never really thought of it."
Right.
And that's when my friend Melissa Cohn, who owned the largest mortgage company in the United States, she brought me on, and we created right away. Went to training. I said, let's create a new breed of broker program. And we set expectations because there were no expectations. And in the absence of expectations, people create their own, right? So we didn't have to fire anybody. There was a natural attrition of, when the culture started to change of what was expected and what we needed to do for the clients. If the loan officers didn't want to do it, they went someplace else. That's the beauty of being in business. It's like, it's a fluid thing, but you don't have to, it's none of the worries and heartache that you take sometimes to bed with you when you're in education.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, there is a big difference there. But you also now speak to large audiences. And you do a sort of a mentorship in that way. How is that different? How is that similar? How do you build relationships when doing that? How are you able to do that?
Exactly the same way to what Rick said. It's that authenticity piece and recognizing talents in others and being able to feed off of that. So when I left Element, fully intending that I was going to retire and head down here and take care of my mom and dad, et cetera, but I jumped into a consultant role, helping companies do some strategic development, et cetera. So fast forward, COVID hits and everybody was in the same basket, teachers, salespeople, whatever, everybody was used to do it. If they did do Zoom, they did it like this.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we had to learn to be there and connected and use this as our way to connect.
Yep.
So I built out with a young startup, this young startup company we built, they were a lead generation company. And I said, you need an education component to keep these agents busy during their COVID vacation, right? So we built out a whole training program that just has like beyond my wildest dreams.
Wow.
And we do daily webinars, motivational, but also informational. So
Right. Sort of embedding it in. Yeah, it really is important to keep those connections, especially now in these times with the pandemic too.
Yeah. It's been the whole, I'm sure in education as well, but it was things that the real estate community would have never used, like virtual technology, virtual open houses, video, drones, you name it. All of a sudden, March 15th, they had to start using it, even if they didn't know how to use it.
Right. So it was taking, being able to, completely pivot everything. And it's interesting because in the education world, we saw it, but it's so interesting that the parallel is completely there as well with the corporate world too. And I think that your mentorships, your speaking, your motivational work and your transition from education to the corporate world. I think all of that has probably played a huge role. And plus the fact, as we talked about, it has to come from the heart and able to really do that and do it well.
Yeah, and just like to Rick, I can tell just from the way that Jerri was talking about you and your time together, and then the things that you talked about as far as the interaction you had with your folks. It's the same in the corporate world. You get good CEOs and you get the ones that are just interested in the bottom line and really not in the culture or anything. It doesn't make it bad. Those people, their businesses are usually very successful, but where you really get the juice and like what Rick was describing of how he saw something in Jerri and it was so cool to be able to let that blossom. It is exactly the same in business, which now is an interesting thing because what I'd really like to take is what I learned in business and bring it back to education and talking about what kids really need in the outside.
Exactly.
Yes, that's what we need. We're kind of at that crossroads now where we could use that. And Rick and Laura, I both hear you saying it's kind of an oxymoron. It's being a mentor. It's not about you. but then really it is all about you, because it's the modeling and the culture that you set.
Right.
So it's not about you and you're empowering others, but it's all about you in what you do and what you say and the culture that you develop. As we talk about that, our podcast, we have a lot of education listeners. So Dr. Dole, I know that you work for Kansas State University and you help mentor those new superintendents and some principals and getting them out there. What are some of the things that you're finding? I guess I want to ask in the pandemic, and what are some of the needs that our new leaders have today that maybe they didn't have before?
So it seems to me, and I am one of the reasons I hired Jerri is that I am not a natural with technology. I'm not naturally drawn to it, and obviously Jerri is, and I say that because I think that the new leaders, or all leaders in Kansas, really have kind of adjusted and adapted to the technology. So that piece has been a challenge, but I think they've done that pretty well. It's back to culture. How do you build the culture of a school when either you're all online or you're hybrid, or worse, going back and forth every 2 weeks? And so it's hard. I mean, teachers are legitimately complaining. I mean, it's just really, really hard. So I think the biggest challenge has been the culture piece, and that revolves around the ability to communicate. I mean, the pandemic has just really put some barriers in our way, and thank God for Zoom and other ways to communicate, or we'd really be in trouble. So I think it's the culture piece that's been the biggest challenge. Now, the other thing is, gang, we can't lose sight of our kiddos. I think we've got some kids are going to come out of the pandemic with some severe deficits, and how we catch them up may be critical to whether those kids are successful. And so I think the upcoming challenge is, okay, now we can meet face-to-face more. What are we going to do to catch these kiddos up? Because unquestionably, there will be some pretty significant gaps for kids.
Yeah.
Right. Are you doing most of your mentoring via Zoom now?
All of it.
All of it. Yes.
Yeah, all of it. We allow our mentors to go on site if the school district allows it. But one way to track that is mileage. So we pay mileage to mentors when they go out on site, because we think that's really important to get them on site. And we're paying about 40% of what we paid last year, which means that about 60% of all the mentoring that's happening in Kansas is via Zoom in our case. And I have just decided, because I'm not a young person anymore, that I'm not going to risk it. And so I do all of mine via Zoom.
Yes. Have you found that it's as effective? Can you make it as effective?
Actually, Jerri, it's not. I miss walking in and sitting down and letting them give you a tour of their building and give you a tour of their district. So that part I miss. And I think we have lost something there. But as far as the face-to-face, to be honest with you, this is pretty effective. You can see and observe, and you don't get all of the nonverbal that are happening, but it's pretty darn effective. And I think it is one of the things we talk a lot about. What are we going to keep? What's something that we're going to keep after the pandemic? Well, I think a piece of our mentoring will remain via Zoom, simply because it's cheaper. And not only from a money standpoint, but from a time standpoint, you just cut out all that travel time. So not exclusively, but I would bet that we adjust our expectation to include some online conferencing.
Are you finding too that there's less people coming into administration roles?
This is really significant, gang.
Oh, it is?
Yes, very significant. So we normally have about 35 superintendent vacancies in the state of Kansas per year. And that's a pretty normal turnover. We may have 100 next year. And it's because people my age and younger are saying, I don't need to do this anymore. I can retire, I can draw my benefits, and the challenges that is put on them. I equate this to an ethical decision. Ethical decisions are not about right versus wrong. It's about right versus right. And in this case, it's a right versus right. I mean, you can listen to teachers and say, you are absolutely right when you say to us that we shouldn't put you in danger teaching kids in a regular classroom.
Yes.
And it's absolutely right that many of our kiddos desperately need that in-person instruction. Well, those kinds of decisions put in front of you every day are forcing people out of the profession. So what that means is we have younger people moving into higher leadership roles without the seasoning, without the good mentoring that we're talking about here today. And that's really a recipe, not for disaster necessarily, but that's a recipe for some very challenging times.
Right. And they're moving into this position in, and I hate this word, unprecedented times. So there's not really someone that can shepherd you through this easily.
Yeah.
That was already starting to happen a little bit as my generation retired, and that's just been accelerated. So new superintendents, for example, many of them, particularly in smaller districts, don't have the advantage of watching somebody else do the job as an assistant sup or a director. And watching them interact with the Board of Education, which is by far the most challenging part of being a superintendent. So yeah, that's become a real challenge, which, by the way, puts even more emphasis on making sure they have good mentors who can guide them through that process.
Right. That listening ear, that someone that can push them. You bet. Yes. I did not realize that there were so many openings like.
That's incredible, but it makes sense. It does make a lot of sense.
It really does. And it seems too that no matter, you said the ethical decision, and that's so true because no matter what decision a superintendent makes now, it seems 50% of the people are going to be unhappy with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Whereas before, I don't think you had quite those odds. There were
Well,
always
we call it 80-20, but it's
Yes.
definitely shifted for sure now because nothing is easy. As you said, Rick, everything is just a bit more challenging now. Rick, you also mentioned the fact that we can't lose sight of the kiddos, right? There's definitely going to be a deficit, but also I wonder too, Laura, now that you are in the corporate world, I know, back in the 90s when I was teaching, we talked about, and we still do, 21st century skills that are required. In fact, you sent me to a program that allowed me to go for the summer to see a bunch of different businesses and industries. And they all talked about the same thing, about communication and collaboration as being the number one thing that was lacking in the workforce. What are you finding that might be lacking or is really great that you're finding for those coming into the workforce?
Well, absolutely. There's always communication breakdowns everywhere unless you get those systems put in place. And what I found in business, and it's probably the same as when we bring on a new reading curriculum or math curriculum, it's all the way you present it, right? And roll it out. And you get the buy-in. And so sometimes what you do is you go around and you talk to your key communicators and your stakeholders, et cetera, to get them getting people revved up and then bringing it out in a non-threatening way, even though the bubble over some of the teachers' heads would be like, oh my God, we're going to do this, but they'd be silent, And this is the same in business. Exactly the same in business is when you start to bring on new technologies and new approaches to things. The interesting thing is that what we saw, and I agree with you 100%, Rick, I think that we are going to see when the dust settles that we have some kids that have some serious deficits. And it reminds me of the book, Savage Inequalities, and the whole idea that we have to rewire folks to understand that in order to bring those kids up, that equality doesn't mean equal. We might have to reroute some funds and time and everything to these kids. And that's one thing in business. You do it a little bit, but it's not as drastic because you're not talking about a kid's life. It's
Yeah.
But we did see when we went to the online, it was always so difficult to get people to come to meetings and to take extra training that they needed to up their game, et cetera. But as soon as we went to Zoom and people got used to it, we saw an increase. Almost every company that I consult with saw an increase in the attendance. Now, I think in the very beginning, it's because people were starved for connection, and
Right.
their only connection, and everybody was paralyzed. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. The state of Pennsylvania totally shut down. No closings, and they're closed down again. So real estate stopped, right? Which freaked these people out because they're all independent contractors.
Right.
So that was a whole thing there as far as, getting those people comfortable. But I'll akin it to the same thing is when you bring new approaches to education, making sure you get people comfortable. And it's that communication. That I think is across any vertical in any industry, that's the biggest pain point.
Right.
Yes. Right.
Then you get the people who are like, nobody ever tells me anything, right? You're like, so that's another thing.
Oh, yeah.
One of the reasons I could go into a company and get up on a stage, I could be like out in California, I was out in front of like 55, 6,500 agents, whatever. And the agent's like, yeah, because you can't be Jesus in your own backyard, right? And you're bringing somebody in from the outside and they say, just like you guys, this in your districts and stuff you say, and everybody's like, yeah, there goes Jamie again. Then they bring somebody in from the outside, they're like, yay.
Yeah, right.
Yes. And I heard you say that you would love to go back to education and kind of bring in some of the, what would you tell educators? What would you bring to them from business?
The biggest thing that I see when young folks come in is that they are so tied still to rote approaches. And they want the secret formula, and it's instead of what Rick was saying, not giving them the formula, giving them the bandwidth to be able to start to figure it out and see. So it's so refreshing seeing young people come into the industry and right away start to look at what other people were doing and say, I want to do it differently. Here's what I can use. I can utilize these tools. Now, in this group that I created, Ready Agent One, I have a lot of these young folks teaching some of the more experienced agents. And the things that the experienced agents tried since March till now, they would have never done before.
Sure.
Never done before.
Yes.
So that would be what I would want to take into education is that, yes, it's so important. We've got to make sure that we get through the curriculum, et cetera, but also when Jamie and I were in Colts Neck, we were really big we had the state testing, but then we had our own performance-based testing. And we worked very closely with Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe and a lot of the people out of Maryland, and to focus on how do kids hit the ground running? And it's really through performance. It's not through multiple choice, which we all know.
Right.
But it's still they come into the industry used to filling out a multiple choice test and not used to experiences.
And that kind of brings me back to why Dr. Dole was such a different teacher at the time when I went through school. It was just the regurgitate the answers back. And his classroom was all based on higher level thinking and making you think about things. And so you were just way ahead of your time is what I think. We need more of that higher level thinking.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Jerri, and this isn't necessarily an indictment of education, but would you say that was 40 years ago? So you think that we should have made more progress around this than we have? But in fairness to our teachers, our top-down leadership put us in a bubble mentality for about 15 years there, where we were just teaching to that test. And I sense that we're slowly coming out of that. But our young teachers, not 5 years ago, our young teachers were still being trained that way. They were still being trained to make sure that kids can demonstrate competency on a multiple choice test, to where we had to reach back to teachers with 20 years experience just to find someone who knew how to teach for higher level thinking. I do see some progress in that area now from a teacher education standpoint, where maybe we're starting to get back to some of that higher order thinking.
Yeah. And do you think the pandemic has really caused teachers and business people to have to think higher level than before?
You know, I was thinking about that the other day, Jerry. I'm not sure. I think that if I were a rote memorization teacher, I probably adapted that, and I'm continuing to use that online because you can. Yeah. What's really fun to see, though, are the teachers that were very creative, and then they've blossomed online. So I don't know that the technology has forced people to teach differently if they didn't have that already in their mindset. By the way, you know, people are going to watch this. One thing to keep in mind is that I'm hearing from the State Department that the federal dollars that are flowing through as part of the CARES Act and now the other money that's being directed out to schools and school districts, there is going to be some cash, gang, that is going to be available to meet the needs of kids. And I was visiting with our Commissioner of Education a couple of days ago, and he just flat out said, there is going to be some money. So this may be a great opportunity for us to be very creative about how we're going to catch these kids up. And teachers are tired, but maybe it's a team approach. Maybe it's teams of teachers taking responsibilities for some of our most at-risk kiddos. But I would hope that people would pressure their school and their school district teachers to release some of those funds so that they can use them to catch these kids up.
This is just what Laura was talking about. It's going to have to take some monetary and people resources to get this happening, to catch them up. So I'm glad to hear that you see that there is light at the end of the tunnel in terms of money to help this happen, because I do worry about it. I do.
You know, I asked you guys about Clubhouse, and it is a new app that is a forum for people to be able to come in and pick topics, et cetera, that they want to weigh in on. It's much like the old chat rooms, or if you're as old as I am, the party lines that people used to have, they'd call into to speak to each other. So on Mondays, what I'm going to be doing at 11 o'clock Eastern every Monday is going to be Mentorship Monday. And so when, for example, when I give you guys the link, all you have to do is follow me. And every time I start a room, it'll come up in your announcements or your notifications. Laura just started a room. And what you'll see is you start to go around and following people, and you're going to get these notifications, and it's almost addictive. So I have to set a time of when I'm going to be on Clubhouse and when I'm not. And the way that the rooms are structured, you have the speaker floor. And there can be one speaker, there can be hundreds of speakers. Okay. And then you have like the waiting room, and then people can raise their hand if they want to come in and talk. And it's really, so far, it's been very pleasant. You don't have a lot of people in there trying to hawk their stuff. It's a giving, it's a play it forward giving.
It sounds perfect. It sounds perfect for you to start a mentorship topic. And that's, you said, what time on Mondays? Mentorship
11 Eastern.
11 Eastern.
And I will send both of you invites, and you can start playing with it. And
I would love that.
I'll put the link in our show notes also. Thank you so much. That sounds perfect.
It's on right now, because it took off like crazy. It's only on iOS. It's not Android yet. They're still building out Android.
Okay.
Yeah, and for all of us that love to continue to learn, it's just perfect. Because, and it seems like it kind of democratizes learning too, that you're not having to pay for this and pay for that.
Well, my head was going right away. Imagine teachers being able to listen in to some of the business forums, and typically not being able to go to those kind of conferences. Now all of a sudden you have access to it.
And we need to connect teachers to businesses and make that's where they need to be talking.
And not artificially the way we've always done it in the past, where the business donates computers and this.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Oh, this is great, Laura. Thank you.
I'll see you on Clubhouse.
Yeah,
we will. I'm totally with you on that. But as we begin to kind of land this plane today, I had heard something that a quote that was, if you want to do something great, dream, dare, and do. If you want to do something extraordinary, dream, dare, and do with great mentors as they help you uncover your potential and unleash what you can do. And then finally, if you really want to learn something about yourself, become a mentor. And so we want to thank both of you for being such positive mentors in our lives and making such a difference to us. And I hope that Jamie and I are paying it forward to other people by mentoring through your examples. So we thank you both so much for being here and for mentoring us for 42 years, Dr. Dole.
Thank you for the invitation.
You bet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great. It was great meeting you, Rick.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.